That's the place he's going. Egypt.
Now a carriage takes Bruce past a temple.
At the time Joseph arrived, Egypt was the most powerful civilization in the world. And there was no place to feel its grandeur more than Karnak Temple in ancient Thebes, now Luxor.
The massive complex glows in external lighting.
Today, even in ruins, it would easily qualify as one of the wonders of the world. For ancient Egyptians, or a visiting Israelite, approaching what is still the largest temple complex in the world must have been an awe-inspiring act.
Ancient Egyptian statues and monuments stand against crumbled walls. As tourists flock toward an entry passage in the clay brick building, Bruce lags behind and gazes at the ruins. He rejoins the tour and they approach steps to a towering colonnade. The tour group takes photos.
May the evening soothe and welcome you, O travelers from Upper Egypt.
Even to the modern Western eye, its scale is almost unimaginable. Karnak is large enough to hold at least 10 Notre Dames and 20 Parthenons.
Daytime. On a wide river, Bruce rides in a tour boat, gazing across the rippled waves toward populated shorelines.
The key to Egypt's strength was the Nile, the longest river in the world. It begins in Central Africa, flows north through Ethiopia, then floods into Egypt. Nile silt was so fertile that farmers could grow 2 crops from the same land in the same year.
Now, in a spacious livestock market, herdsmen and traders cluster around cows and other animals. As Bruce makes his way through the crowd, men unload a bull from a truck.
After arriving in Egypt, Joseph would likely have found himself in a place like this, a thriving bazaar where international goods are bought and sold.
Wads of money change hands as men sit on the ground over tea.
Long before Rome, all roads led to Egypt. Huge trading caravans came up from the south, east across the desert, and down from the Promised Land. Traders brought all sorts of barter: cows, sheep, goats, camels, and yes, humans.
Bruce passes a man leading a calf by its rope. Elsewhere in the bazaar, a man and a boy wear richly colored robes as the man counts money.
In Genesis 39, Joseph is sold as a servant into the household of the Pharaoh's chief steward, Potiphar.
A statue depicts a bare-chested woman.
Potiphar's wife tries to seduce the handsome young Joseph, but Joseph refuses. She then accuses Joseph of trying to seduce her. Joseph is thrown into the Pharaoh's prison.
On a narrow stairway, a shadowy figure shuts and locks a barred door. Now hieroglyphs show a man beside a pot and another sitting with his back to him.
Then the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, had a dream. They said to Joseph, "We each have had a dream, and there is no interpreter of it." So Joseph said, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell them to me, please."
Now, on a stone stairway, Bruce carries a lantern, illuminating hieroglyphics on the walls.
I descended deep under the banks of the Nile to explore the role of religion and dreams in ancient Egypt. Here in this royal tomb, like the one King Tut was found in, images of Seti I's nighttime journey toward the afterlife fill the walls.
A relief shows an ancient god weighing an orb in each hand.
I felt as if I were entering some private religious sanctuary.
A wall with raised, painted carvings shows Egyptians riding in 2 boats.
In death, the nighttime journey was permanent. In life, the nightly journey of sleep was temporary and filled with dreams. The Egyptians worshipped many gods, but the centerpiece of their religion was the god of the sun, Ra.
Bruce continues into a dark chamber.
It was when the sun went down that the mysteries of the dark unfolded. Priests who could interpret these nighttime messages or dreams were highly valued. While Joseph is in prison, he also becomes known as a gifted interpreter of dreams.
Bruce lifts his lantern, illuminating images of Egyptian gods and mortals higher on the wall. Gazing upward, he sees more rows of hieroglyphics running along the passageway ceiling. Now, 3 enormous pyramids tower over the sand, and several smaller ones surround them. Bruce and a man in Western garb walk between the paws of the Sphinx. They face an inscribed wall.
In the shadow of the Sphinx, I met with the renowned Egyptologist, Dr. Gabi Ali Gabala, to explore the significance of dreams in Egyptian life and in the Bible. The Sphinx was built by one pharaoh almost 5,000 years ago. But later, it entered another pharaoh's dream. This has to do with a dream, right? This is what, Thutmose IV?
Well, this is Thutmose IV, and it describes his dream before he became king. So he came to have a rest in the shadow of the Sphinx. And when he rested there, the Sphinx, that was the god Horus of the horizon, came to him in his dream. And he actually spoke to him.
They point to the writing.
3,000 years after the Sphinx was built, the young prince, Thutmose IV, dreamt that the god Horus promised him the crown of Egypt if he'd clear the sand around the statue. As pharaoh, Thutmose inscribed the dream's prophecy in stone. Much later, the dreams of another pharaoh provide a dramatic moment in Joseph's story. There's a passage in the Bible I wanted to read to you. It's Genesis 41. It's lovely. It says, Pharaoh has this dream and he can't interpret it. And he says, so he sends for Joseph. And Joseph comes from the dungeon and it says, he had his hair cut and changed his clothes. And Pharaoh says to Joseph, I've had a dream, but no one else can interpret it. Will you interpret it for me? And Joseph, it's great here, he says, no, I'm not going to tell you. God will see to Pharaoh's welfare.
Yes.
In ancient Egypt, whoever did the dream interpretation, where did the power come from?
Well, the power came from God himself. However, God has got his own agents, and the agents in this time will be priests.
So even though at this point in the story, Joseph is imprisoned in Egypt and he's a very small man, it almost as if the story still has inherited all this Egyptian influence, so that when the Israelites were here, they picked up a lot.
Well, you have to remember that when the Israelites came to Egypt, they lived in Egypt, they lived in Egyptian atmosphere, and they absorbed the Egyptian culture. So they were surrounded, so to speak, with the Egyptian culture, and they had to deal with it. And later on, of course, they themselves became Egyptianized.
Now, by the Nile, a blurry image shows herdsmen leading cattle along the riverbank.
Then it came to pass that Pharaoh had a dream. Suddenly there came up out of the river 7 cows, fine-looking and fat. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them out of the river, ugly and gaunt, and stood by the other cows. And the ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 fine-looking and fat cows. He slept and dreamed a second time. And suddenly 7 heads of grain came up on one stalk, plump and good. Then behold, 7 thin heads blighted by the east wind sprang up after them, and the 7 thin heads devoured the 7 plump and full heads.
Now, walking up a mountain path, a local leads a donkey as Bruce follows.
The Pharaoh brings Joseph out of prison to interpret his dreams. Joseph declares that the dreams portend 7 years of abundance, followed by 7 years of famine. Joseph recommends that the Pharaoh preserve food from the time of abundance for use during the time of famine. The Pharaoh is so impressed by Joseph's plan that he places him in charge of his entire court.
Bruce stands on a cliff.
In Genesis 12, Abraham leaves Mesopotamia, just a lone man and his family. Now, less than 3 generations later, his great-grandson Joseph becomes second in command of the greatest empire on earth. And the Bible, which earlier is interested in herding and wandering, suddenly becomes interested in the details of royal power.
Below, a temple sprawls in the valley.
Joseph's title was vizier, or prime minister, a role that is memorialized on the walls of royal tombs.
Bruce approaches an excavated doorway.
Egyptologist Dr. Yasser Izzat gave me a guided tour in the Valley of the Kings.
This is one of the most beautiful tombs in this area.
A man uses a mirror to reflect sunlight inside.
So these are all the images of the vizier?
Yes, yes.
Glints of reflected sunlight illuminate wall hieroglyphics. A young boy further in reflects the light off his own mirror.
As you see, and everywhere here they showed the title of the vizier. You see the blue circle up.
The circle with the dots in it.
Yeah, above it, you see the sign above it?
Yeah, now what is that sign?
Yeah, this is Emira, means the overseer of the city.
Now there's something I want to read you. In the Bible, in the story of Joseph in Genesis 41, it says, "See, I put you in charge of all the land of Egypt," the Pharaoh says to Joseph. And then it says, "And removing his signet ring from his hand, Pharaoh put it on Joseph's hand, and he had him dressed in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain about his neck." Now, does that sound like what actually happened here?
Yes.
So it's almost like you can draw a direct connection between these hieroglyphs on the wall and what's in this book.
Yeah, that's right.
Now on the Nile, Bruce rides a crowded ferry. A tray of dried grain lies on a merchant's counter.
As the famine Joseph predicted spreads beyond Egypt, many foreigners are drawn to the country and its food reserves, including Joseph's family, his 11 brothers, and eventually his father, Jacob. Jacob has a new name, Israel, which means one who wrestles with God. His descendants will be known as the Israelites.
As the boat docks, a crewman ties it off, and Bruce disembarks with the other passengers.
I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. But now do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. You shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near to me, you and your children, your children's children, your flocks and your herds, and all that you have.
In a van, Bruce passes lush fields of green crops. The map shows a red line move up the Nile.
And Joseph's family of some 70 members settle in the richest land of Egypt, Goshen, in the fertile delta area near the mouth of the Nile. The Israelites live, prosper, and multiply in Egypt for more than 4 centuries. It seems they have found a true home.
On foot, Bruce exits a field of divided crops, crosses a fallen palm tree bridging a deep ditch, and lugs his backpack up a shady dirt road.
I came to the Delta to explore what their lives might have been like at this time.
Now he enters a village. A boy on a donkey rides past, and an old man sits on the corner of a brick building. Now, as the sun blazes prior to twilight, a smoke from an open fire rises. Bruce eats with villagers gathered around it.
Archaeological evidence doesn't reveal specifics about the Israelites' time in Egypt. The culture, laws, and rituals of what would become known as Judaism, such as observance of the Sabbath, holidays, and keeping kosher, would all be created after they left Egypt.
They dip bread in bowls of spice beside pitchers of milk. Daytime, as Bruce nears a temple with statues and an obelisk, a woman sweeps the path with a palm branch.
It seems clear, however, that some elements of the Israelites' religion were influenced by their centuries-long stay in Egypt. The idea of the tabernacle and the structure of their later temple, for example, but most especially their emphasis on storytelling.
He eyes a huge archway covered with hieroglyphics.
Not only the size of the Egyptian temples impressed the worshippers who came here. Carved onto the very walls are virtual textbooks of their ancient religion, telling the story of the gods and their power over the land.
Bruce walks through a temple courtyard.
Today, 5,000 years after this process started, the monuments of Egypt are a testament to the importance given to these stories and the huge impact they must have had on the Egyptian people. The walls aren't merely sprinkled with writing, they are covered with it.
Bruce wanders past the pillars.
The reason is, these monuments were built in the middle of the 2nd millennium BCE, when writing was just being invented. The Egyptians pioneered the idea of using words and stories to build a national identity.
A carving shows an archer.
The Bible may be the beginning of Western religion, but it's also the culmination of a profoundly Near Eastern sense of how to build a people through storytelling. Egyptians in particular were interested in the components that make for good yarns: sex, revenge, power, despair, and reconciliation. Stories that every level of Egyptian society could relate to.
Bruce faces us.
And it seems impossible not to conclude that when the Israelites came into Egypt and came into contact with all this writing, that their own storytelling improved as well.
Now in a tomb, a mummy lies on a slab.
The story of Joseph in the Bible also includes a reference to one of Egypt's most well-known practices of the dead. In order for a dead person's soul to enter the afterlife, it needed a body. This inspired the most famous preservation technique in history, mummification.
Bruce peers at the blackened, dried head protruding from the linen-wrapped corpse.
The Bible says that Joseph's father, Jacob, was himself mummified.
Mostly all Egyptian.
So I went to talk with one of Egypt's leading authorities on mummification, Dr. Salima Akrim.
Let me
In
read
Akrim's
you a
apartment.
quote here from the last chapter of Genesis. Then Joseph ordered the physicians in his service to embalm his father.
It required 40 days, for such is the full period of embalming. What's going on here?
So basically, Jacob's being mummified.
Embalming actually takes, the whole making of a mummy takes 70 days, but 40 days are used for the actual preservation of the body, when all the liquids are pulled out of the body and the body becomes sort of a stiff board, but well preserved.
And the fact that the text says in particular 40 days, that rings true to you.
Yeah. One thing that's very interesting about mummification is this 40-day thing, because I think in many of the cultures in the Near East, and many of the religions, you wind up having 40 days associated with mourning. After the body had been completely desiccated, it had to be wrapped, and that basically took another 30 days, bringing the total to 70. And then the wrapping would start. And so as you wrap the bandages, spells are recited, and sometimes the bandages themselves are inscribed with spells, because what you're doing is creating a physical barrier as well as a metaphysical barrier against evil demons and so on that might come and attack.
So the first person embalmed in the story is Joseph's father, and then Joseph himself is embalmed, but they're not pharaohs. I mean, are people other than the pharaohs embalmed?
Absolutely. For anyone who is of high rank, and we do have tombs that have been found relatively intact belonging to architects or nobles, they would be buried with not just, funerary ornaments and several coffins and a sarcophagus, but their chariots, chairs, food, oils, unguents, pillows, jewelry, the clothes they wore in daily life, if they, beds, all kinds of things.
The Bible seems to be paying honor to Egypt and saying, we want to pay tribute to your culture by saying that we're like you.
Egypt was regarded as a very sort of chic culture in the ancient world. The Greeks learned from Egypt. They came to Alexandria. They flocked here because they thought the wisdom of the ancient Egyptians was worthwhile.
So today, even though Judaism came after this, and Christianity and Islam, which had this different belief system, still fundamentally those of us today can make this human connection with the ancient Egyptians.
Certainly, because it's really the same kind of thing. I think no matter what your religious background, there's always this yen people have to try and extend their lifespan or to continue it after their death in some way, shape, or form. It gives them hope.
Now in a painting, shirtless men face a sailboat's helmsman manning the rudder. On the Nile, Bruce sails in a similar but smaller boat.
In ancient Egypt, ships assisted the spirit in its passage to the afterlife.
Bruce sits at the stern with his Bible.
Near the end of his life, just before Joseph is mummified and goes on his own final journey, he gathers his brothers together and he says, I'm about to die. God will surely take notice of you and bring you up from this land to the land he promised on oath to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Joseph, with these words, seems to predict the Exodus. He seems to know that an unfriendly Pharaoh will push down the Israelites, and God will lift them up and take them to the Promised Land. At the end of his life, Joseph is more than an interpreter of dreams. He's a prophet.
The ship floats with a slightly billowed sail past still palms on the shore. The rippling waves glimmer in sunlight. Now, galloping over a rocky hillside, Bruce rides a dark brown horse. Beside him, a local horseman rides a white horse with black spots, mane, and tail. The local points the way and they gallop over a desert valley. They slow their pace as giant pyramids loom above them.
My journey now led me to the greatest symbols of ancient Egypt, the pyramids of Giza outside Cairo. I hope to confront one of the more persistent legends of biblical history, did the Israelites build the pyramids?
They ride past 3 great pyramids. Now, Bruce and his guide climb one's slanted side.
Pyramids were burial chambers designed so a pharaoh's soul could ascend closer to the sun god. But their massive size served a more earthly purpose: to remind the pharaoh's subjects of his awesome power.
The 2 men scale up the many weather-worn ledges made of stone cubes.
The Bible never mentions the pyramids, but ever since the Middle Ages, as Westerners tried to decipher their meaning, they became a symbol of the Israelites' oppression.
Bruce's guide leads the way up the pyramid's cracked and jagged slope. Far below, tourists appear tiny, like moving insects.
Yet if you look at the Bible's basic chronology, the idea of the Israelites building these monuments is an impossibility.
Near the top, Bruce sits and faces us.
I've been doing the math. If Abraham was born around 2000, that puts Joseph here in 1700 and the Israelites in 1300.